Hello and welcome to Blue Sky Thinking, Infinite Blue's fireside chat series, where we delve into the issues that companies face in the quest for total enterprise resilience. I'm Frank Shultz, the CEO at Infinite Blue, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Reider, the Vice President of Global Threat and Crisis Management at Paramount. A 20-year veteran of the entertainment industry, Jeff oversees international security, feature and television production security, and crisis management for Paramount Pictures. He also manages global risk and intelligence, physical security, travel safety, and the Global Security Operations Center for Paramount Global and its subsidiaries, which include brands such as CBS, MTV, Paramount Plus, and Comedy Central, among many others. With employees and talent constantly on the move, including in far-flung places around the world, Paramount faces an extreme level of risk. It's also a highly dynamic organization, having conducted countless acquisitions, which have resulted in an organization that today has 24,000 employees and includes more than 170 networks that reach 700 million subscribers in 180 countries. Wow. Jeff, thanks for taking time out of your schedule here to join me, and that's a lot.
When you put it like that too, I think listening to it, it's I guess when you live it every day, it's different, right? But when you hear it, all that stuff laid out, it's a big job, it's a big deal, but it's fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of brands. It's a large company, very diverse, and there are brands that people interact with on a daily basis around the world. It's an interesting role. Like, what prepped you to get into the role that you're in today at Paramount?
I think it has to do a lot with experience, right? And so I've been, like you said, in the industry for 20 years. I started as part-time security at Paramount, actually September 11th. And that was always interesting, coming into that side, not knowing security, not having anything to do with it, and then coming out and kind of joining the team at that time and seeing that I liked it, I enjoyed it. I liked the diversity of what we were doing. So I ended up working my way up through the industry there. I took over emergency management. I took over training for our security officers locally. And then I took over the technology side of things, which I think for me in my background is always something I've been interested in. So using that technology side, we built out like a local, we called it the SCC, Security Command Center. Did that for almost 10 years, left for a couple years, came back to build our Global Security Operations Center, which was our first kind of expansion into not only the Paramount Pictures brand itself, but expanding outside of that role and covering travelers and really doing duty of care, getting into content security, content protection, which is, of course, for us in the entertainment industry is the big thing, intellectual property, right?
Absolutely.
So protecting that from any threats. And then hiring a team. And when we did the merger with Viacom, myself, I've grown with the company as the company has grown. You kind of have to adapt and do it that way. I think with mergers and the way things are going now, it's the future, and that's what's happening. So I guess for that, learning as you go, learning with experience, always pushing kind of the envelope of what you want to do. And then as other teams come in, kind of bring them into the fold and, learn from other people, learn from people you work with, and learn from people you hire. So.
No, definitely. So you had two different kind of tracks of building up there, right? So the first one was the SCC, as you call it, Security
Command Center.
Security Command Center, yes. SCC, and then the GSOC. Like, what was different about kind of those two platforms you were building? Was it the timing, or was it?
Yeah, it's timing and it's the approach. So the Security Command Center was very centralized around Paramount Pictures itself, and it's like the old alarms.
Physical security.
Okay. Stuff. Yeah, okay. Cameras, that related. And when you bring in GSOC, you really bring the technology piece and really looking outside of those four walls that Paramount is and realizing that the brand goes beyond the studio lot, right? And so for us, realizing that protection also goes beyond the studio lot, I think that's that big changeover from an SEC to a GSOC.
That makes sense. Some of the changeover that we see today too. So, being I'm in the industry about 20 years as well. So, you saw the focus on risk management and then obviously business continuity and disaster recovery. And now we're talking about a topic of resilience. And so we talk a lot about enterprise resilience, but resilience is kind of, I don't want to say the buzzword, it's the pivot, right? But it also is the buzz. I think the buzzword came before the pivot came. But what does resilience mean to what you're building at Paramount and how you think about day-to-day operations and even long-term kind of in the way that
well, I mean, for me too, I mean, those are all kind of siloed in the past, right? And enterprise resilience is the combination of all those things into one. And I think resiliency is big on being flexible and elasticity. You have to, it can't be a hard wall. It can't be something you stop, right? It has to be able to flex when something happens or when a crisis happens, right? So when you bring in business continuity, you bring in emergency management, you bring in risk management, and you build it under one framework, which is enterprise risk. I think that's the way the industry is pushing. That's the way it's going. And if you're not kind of on that bandwagon now, that's not too late, but it's something you really need to think about and bring in, if those teams are siloed, bringing them together. But at the same time, really thinking, like I said, outside those four walls, how can you build resilience into your enterprise? How can you protect it from those threats? And how you can be more proactive in that operation?
Yeah, what does that look like day to day? Because obviously there's long-term strategic, short-term day to day. So like, Monday morning, what does resilience look like?
Well, okay, so Monday morning is obviously putting out the fires from the weekend, right? Hopefully before that stuff happens, there's already a response plan involved in that. So the short term is relying on the SOPs, relying on your team, relying on the practice and the training that you've done, right? When you think long term, that's when you institute those policies, those procedures, those operating procedures, you test against them. And then you reach out to other people, other organizations, you benchmark, you say, what have you guys experienced? How are you doing things? What has hit you that you think can hit me? You reach out to your vendors and you talk about your software systems. How could those impact us? Is there someone else using this the way that I'm not, that I could benefit from, right? And test against that. So I think that long-term strategy is something that people really need to think about for developing stuff, but the short-term is testing those policies against crisis that's actually happening.
Makes sense. So when you talk to peers, what are you hearing are the threats that they should be worried about today? Because clearly what affects Paramount might not affect other people, but other organizations.
They're wide ranging. In the entertainment industry specifically, it's a lot of things around, and especially after COVID, a lot of stuff got pushed online, right? So we're seeing a lot of threats coming from online, whether it's social media stuff, protest activity, anything involving, politics is always a hot button topic too. And with us doing CBS News, it's something that we have to think about at the same time where, risk resilience, we build in, hey, stay away from this area. There's protests happening. We'll reach out to travelers. Don't go there. News is like, we're going in. We're going to be there. So deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Or help us out, and we can provide support, or we can provide any intel, any risk things on the ground too. So I think it just depends on that flex and organization. Reach out to other people that have the same kind of issues.
Okay.
And a lot of it comes back to kind of that exposure, right? And in streaming now, Paramount Plus is you are in households, not only domestically but internationally. How does that impact that organization? What threats are you seeing coming in from that? As you bring mergers back in and bring everything together, like us with Showtime coming back and forth, what does that bring back to the table from our side too? How has Disney dealt with that? How has, Netflix or Warner Brothers dealt with that side? And I think in us having those collaborative talks, it's been great because we all have the same, in the security industry, the resilience industry, we all have the same ideas and mindset. We want to protect our assets, right? So it's nice to have those open conversations.
Yeah. So as you think about some of the changes you just talked about, like divestitures, mergers and acquisitions, rebranding, how does that affect the way you look at resilience? So how do you weather that? Because it really can create silos. And so if you take on a company, acquire a company, they already have a way of doing this, right? And it might not be the same way as you. So how does that work?
It's tough. So, I think the first thing you have to do is you have to have a collaborative mindset, right? You have to be willing and open to not have that ego in the room and realize that, hey, maybe my way of doing things isn't always the best way of doing things, right? And listen to those teams, meet those teams. With us, we got great exposure, and not great during COVID, but we got exposure during COVID to the higher organization itself because we ran the risk and intel portion. So they relied heavily on us to monitor as it goes on and its impact and effect on the organization itself. And in that, we got exposure to the other teams, and it happened right at the same time we did the CBS merger back with Viacom. So when CBS came on board, obviously massive organization and a lot different for us to monitor. We met with those teams and we had a lot of good conversations around protecting the resiliency in the entertainment industry and ourselves in general around a pandemic, right? But then expanding further those conversations and working with their teams. And I know CBS has on the tech side, because they deal a lot with streaming and network news, and they can't go down. So continuity for them is very important, but it's very heavy network related, where ours was more physical or production related.
Got it. Because they're live all the time.
They're live,
right? So
yeah. So it's instant, right? They need instant continuity. They need instant access. They need instant everything. So it was good for me to have those conversations with them and build that team. And I know their resilience team, like Rita Stafford leads it over there, and She does amazing work on kind of building teams together. And we're actually having conversations now about the same thing. We're doing the Super Bowl this year.
Okay.
So for us, that's a big deal, big on planning, and, testing our policies against that side. So for me, it's about collaboration and then realizing that you can bring both these teams together because you have the same end goals, but the approach might be different. But a one team strategy for the enterprise is what's best.
No, I love that. One team is one of our key values
at
Blue. So we talk about one team a lot. So you have, again, a lot going on. Live news, people traveling, really high profile actors, contractors, whatever, basically like well-known stars. And you're setting them up and going to places that sometimes you might say, well, we shouldn't go there because there's a high risk, to your point with the news team, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, no, I need to be here for news, or I need to be here because this is the backdrop we want. We want to look like we're on Mars, and this is the best place to look like we're on Mars, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Like, how does that affect how you think about keeping everyone safe and keeping the business going?
Well, it's huge, right? And I think that's something that's pretty key to our industry in general. But, at the same time, it's different than, like I said, protecting those four walls. Mm-hmm. You have to think outside the box. You have to think of impacts.
You're literally outside the box. You're anywhere, right?
Yeah. So it does depend. And I think for me in playing those areas, and we've touched on it, but duty of care, not only to A-list actors, stars, and if we have 200, 300 people traveling from the U.S. to someplace overseas that might not be as safe as we want it to be, and they're going to be there for 3 or 4 months. How do we build local resilience around that? How do we work with local contacts to get help out? How do we work with our medical travel partners? Because there's going to be medical problems. There's going to be incidents. How do we set up a plan where we can build kind of a bubble around that set? And that's what we like to do when we talk to them during the production meetings. Mm-hmm. Like, we will build an invisible bubble around your set. You guys do what you have to do in the bubble. We will protect everything around it and keep you safe, right? So that's kind of the end goal, and that's that thought process on it. And it goes into extending that duty of care outside of those four walls and really pushing my team in general to monitor for that stuff, but not only monitor, be proactive and respond to it. And if something happens, be, that steady rock for, the enterprise itself to support those teams when they're out there and to give the people on the ground kind of that mindset of the company is watching and pays attention and takes care of me. And it lets them do what they do without having to worry about logistics and everything else. So
no, it makes sense. And you can build a bubble, and sometimes people want to go outside the bubble.
Yeah. That happens a lot.
Deal with that, right?
Especially on weekends and nights.
Because we're in a remote location, but they want to go out. We want to go out. We want to see what's going on. We want to go eat somewhere that maybe we shouldn't go eat, and food poisoning happens or something, right?
Oh yeah.
Which is interesting. Now we talked to, I know you know Jason Viock.
Yes.
We talked to him in our last fireside chat that we did earlier. We talked a lot about how, and you talked about this with, I think, the move from the SCC to the GSOC, the convergence of cyber and physical security. Because a lot of companies run these separately. Yeah. And not that it's right or wrong, it's a different way of doing it. And Jason talked a lot about bringing them together. Like, what's your thoughts about kind of the cyber and physical security? Do you see them converging, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I definitely do. And the talk was great with Jason. He's a brilliant dude, and he really pushes the envelope in that kind of stuff. And I know for us, we are a little behind the tech industry in that side. And especially with us, the mergers and everything that's happening, I think it's just part of doing business is working with those teams and the resilience side, the InfoSec teams. And for us, it's not just cyber InfoSec, right? We have content security, which is our protection of our intellectual property. And that's huge. And it's a team in itself that we do a ton of work with. We travel with them, the safety teams too. But as far as the convergence side, it's kind of the same thing now where every physical security system touches the internet now, right? Mm-hmm. So I work with my tech partners on a day-to-day basis for that stuff. They actually control our budgets on a lot of things. And the InfoSec teams at the same time, if we get an online threat, which we talked about to an executive, we work through that system and, building a POI or trying to identify who that person is, but we work with the InfoSec teams on that same side because they can do monitoring. And it's kind of their role too is coming back into the physical side. It's not just network attacks, right? For us, it's brand attacks at the same time. So they got to monitor for that. And pay attention to that's happening, but then I also deal with that. So the convergence is definitely there. We are still, in our side, we are still siloed, but I talk to them 2-3 times a week.
So you're breaking the silo down at least.
Correct.
Kind of what are you seeing? How does this impact the rest of the organization?
Exactly. And we have those cross-function abilities. We have, weekly meetings with them where we go over this stuff. We partner on the same systems that we use. sometimes, like I said, different logins on that side, but we notify each other back and forth, and we're on weekly reports at the same time. So it's there. It's definitely in the future. When people say security now, it's kind of synonymous with physical and, cybersecurity. It's becoming kind of one word, where in the past it was mainly physical. Now they think network technology, brand protection, like I said, intellectual property protection. So it's definitely moving that direction for us too. We're a little behind tech, but it's getting there.
No, it makes sense. I think if you think about that evolution of like kind of getting to resilience, in the beginning, DR existed because companies put a lot of money into mainframes, and it's like, let's protect this huge asset. And then we thought about business continuity, because how do we keep the business going? Risk, and now the resilience aspect. Now we kind of say, like, what leads, tech or the business, right? Like, which one's more important? And they're equally important today.
Yeah.
Obviously the physical security, being able to get into a location, especially when you're dependent on that physical, either specialized equipment, or you actually need a set or a scene.
Yeah, and for us too, I think it's that same thing like you talked about and in my past, it's been heavily physical. Mm-hmm. We want to protect physical assets. We want to protect the scene. We want to keep that motion going. But now you bring in Paramount Plus, and now it's streaming. We have to keep the networking systems up. We have to keep the live stream going. If during the Super Bowl, 100 million people log in at once, is it going to crash us? That's a problem. So how do we protect against that too? So it is definitely a mindset change. And with us and the diversity of the organization in general, I think it's tough to prepare for everything all at once, but you can try to knock off those main things and test against those main things and really change your mindset on what actually touches the organization or how to harden it against anything else.
Makes sense. I think with the way the world's trending, some of it seems like things are getting worse. There's more active threats. Weather events are much more significant and prevalent. Some of it probably is we just learn about more now because the news is more prevalent. But like, how do you think about like that shift into are you dealing with more things more often?
Definitely, yes.
And so how do you adjust for that? Like, how do you kind of think about, we're going to have not one event today. That would be an easy day, right? We're going to have 5 things that are happening at the same time in different geographies.
Yeah. So, I think it goes back to that short-term, long-term planning, right? Is you have to plan for that stuff, and you have to test against it, because it will happen. And when it happens, it could have a major impact. So take the hurricane last year. Mm-hmm. We had 350 employees in Florida that we had to evacuate out. So we had to do the reach outs to them, have confirmation, contact, get them in touch with HR business partners if they need any assistance, right? A lot of stuff can be done locally, but for us, it's how do you build resiliency against that? So it's integrating HR databases and systems into our risk and travel systems. So we know, because with COVID, with work from home, it changed. The mindset changed, everything changed, where there's not 4,000 people on the lot every day now, right? If you're talking just Paramount Pictures, there's maybe 500 people, and then 3,500 spread around the greater Los Angeles area. So duty of care for us extends to them at home. If something happens to them at home when they're working for us, it's still our responsibility to try to help them as much as we can. And like you said, if it involves wildfires, earthquakes, hurricanes, anything like that, it's up to us to reach out and offer support or assistance, just like you would be if you're sitting at your desk on the lot. So it's definitely a mindset change. It's something that you have to utilize technology to do, but you also have to think about that kind of impact. If something happens, if there's a medical incident with someone on a Zoom call, the people on the Zoom call probably don't know that person's address,
and they're working from home, right?
And they're working from home. So how can I get them help? Right? Yeah. How can you get the word out that you call the operations center? We have their information, and we can dispatch emergency services to help those people out. So it's kind of that big change where it's a lot easier to handle stuff when you're all in the same area, but when you're spread out, you really have to rethink about your policies and procedures.
Makes sense. And you talk about, so we're obviously in the greater Los Angeles area now, filming. How does, like, California has a lot. There's a lot going on in California, right?
Interesting.
We're from Philadelphia. Like, I'm based out of Philadelphia. So, like, when I think about California, I hear wildfires and traffic and earthquakes and droughts and then floods.
Yeah.
And so, like, is it any different the way you think about, like, your local team in California versus somewhere else, or how do you think about that?
I think risk in general, right, is you have the same responses to, or the same overarching responses to. You have your crisis management teams, you have your plans around that side, but how you build localized responses is based on the area you're in. I mean, New York is our headquarters, so we have a very close lens on the headquarters, obviously, but we have a massive operation out here in the movie studio business, in the entertainment industry business, and the deal with California is the localized events, like an earthquake, could be massive, and could destroy all your properties here, impact all of your properties. So it's not just one building in one area, a fire, anything like that. A wildfire could swipe through, take out a bunch of stuff. An earthquake can damage a bunch of things. Droughts, floods. I mean, when we think about stuff that's localized in here in California, we definitely have a bigger, better lens on that. We definitely bring in a more regional concept. So we have Paramount Pictures, we have Nickelodeon Studios in Burbank, and we have, another headquarters building out here, Awesomeness TV, Pluto TV. So how do you bring all those teams under one umbrella to have one generalized response to send back to headquarters, right? This is what's happening. The local teams are going to handle stuff. The Paramount Pictures lot will handle itself. But how does that crisis management team, it's kind of a two-tiered approach, and that's what we're working with Reed on right now in the overarching crisis management team. How to report back up to them so they can involve senior leadership team or the stakeholders and make decisions based on what's actually happening on the ground. So I think that's the big difference, is that massive regional concept, and we just consider Southern California in general, when we think about that. And it's not as siloed because the impacts for a natural disaster can be so big.
Makes sense. That makes sense. So you work a lot. You talk about the crisis management team, clearly a visibility into leadership at Paramount. How do you get buy-in and maintain it there? Like, what's the story there about how you stay relevant, right? Because there's always something going on.
Yeah.
And I guess, is it something that isn't noticed by them as a success because you managed it before it got escalated? But then how do you kind of articulate value, and how do you maintain that buy-in, right?
I mean, I think it goes both ways, right? So there's the typical lunch and learns, like, hey, we're the GSOC, we're global threat management. This is what we do. This is what we can provide you, right? We just did a virtual fair for our travelers, which is a good reach out. Because a lot of times you don't know we exist until something goes wrong. And then you hear from us, right? And you're like, oh, thank you. I didn't know this happened. Or there's a medical incident. We reach out and we handle everything, right? So senior leadership team has always been very receptive to that stuff. We actually report up through the HR function. So we get a lot of exposure in that realm. And unfortunately, I think they find out the good work that we do through crisis and our response to crisis. So if we hone everything in the way we need it to do, if we practice everything we needed to do and respond in the way we need to do, and really help that person, people, production out, news team, that always gets back to leadership. And they talk about it and then they bring it up. And you can do your weekly reports, you can do your metrics, you can do your end of year stuff. But the facts are, when you help someone out, and we've reached out to hundreds of people over the years, and we've never had a negative response to someone to reach out, even if it's a protest, a shooting overseas, something happened in London or Paris, and we reach out, and they don't even know it's happened locally until we talk to them. And we tell them the area it is, and we tell them just avoid this area. They're like, I didn't even know that Paramount was paying attention or cared that much. Thank you. And that's usually the stuff we get. So it's great for us and our team. Yeah. But senior leadership also likes that side, especially with the HR function, is we are there to support them. I take the duty of care very seriously. And I think that kind of rolls up the chain as it goes. And when they see that kind of action, they really support what we do. Any endeavors that we want to do, any stuff we want to pitch into, they've always been very supportive on that side. But like I said, unfortunately, it happens after they get knowledge of you during a crisis.
There's a crisis that occurs.
Yep.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I always think about is kind of the push and pull of efficiency versus resilience, or resiliency, if I want to take the C's on both sides here. How do you see that play out? Like, is that part of your buy-in conversation to say, like, let's not cut because look at what we produce and what we provide when something happens?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to work with that realm, right? And especially finances being as tough as they are right now. It's, you have to build your internal ROI. And so for us, being a cost center and not, creating movies or doing anything, how do you, in the resilience space, I think we're all like this, is how do you justify what you do? And for us, it's not only showcasing that, right? Life safety is obviously a big thing, but at the same time, all of the stuff that we're doing, we'll bring in insurance brokers, right? And you bring down your insurance rates, and you can really justify your existence in the stuff that you do in kind of those generalizations. And can we do something with our security systems and build out, like a COVID response plan, or even health checks? We did that internally, so we didn't have to go to an outside party to do that kind of stuff. So once you showcase those kind of capabilities and things that you can do, and really push not only your agenda, but the agenda of duty of care and helping people and building a true resilience to the company, there's usually a good response from senior leadership team on supporting your ideas and ideals and kind of just letting you do what you do.
Yeah, that's awesome. They see the value for sure. Jeff, as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, like, what is, if you met somebody and they said, hey, I'm just getting in the resilience space, and I'm sure this happens a lot, what's the one piece of advice you would give them? What should they focus on, or where should they start?
I'd probably do a couple. We talked about earlier, collaborate, cooperate. I think those are main two things. Leave your ego at the door, right? You're not going to know everything coming into this industry. It's okay. A crisis is going to happen. You're not going to have all the answers. It's okay to rely on other people for the answers, right? If you build a good team around you, there's no reason to keep everything to yourself. There's no reason to not test your ideas. You have to constantly test your stuff. When I built the GSOC originally, it was 10 years ago. And I did all the SOPs and I created everything the way I thought was the best response to it, right? But that's my response to it. And maybe that's not the best way. So you bring in other people to kind of challenge those assertions, or you test against them and then you change them as you go. So I think people knowing that you have to be flexible. We talked about resiliency and elasticity. You kind of have to be sufficient and self-reliant on not only others, but bringing in those people around you and those thoughts and those ideas, and letting it be okay that you're not the only one involved in the whole situation. So
makes sense. And sometimes it's okay to get it wrong, because
it's okay to get it wrong.
Learn from it, right?
Yeah,
you can learn after the fact.
As long as you learn from it, right?
Exactly.
And as long as you change your response to it, I think that's the main thing, and you will be successful in the industry.
Awesome, Jeff. I want to thank you for sitting down to chat today, and for your great insights. And I want to thank everyone who joined us as well. So in the chat on the right of your screen, we have a link to a short survey. And as we do more of these fireside chats, we'd love to hear your thoughts about today's event and your interest going forward. And we hope everyone enjoyed this. I look forward to having you join us on the next one. So thanks again, Jeff.
Of course. Yeah.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Take care.